Hey everybody, it's Hanvil Legend 826 here. I'm reviewing the 19th episode of Season 4 of Riverdale, which was called Chapter 76, Killing Mr. Honey. So, this is the first time that a Riverdale episode title has somebody's name in the title of the episode. And obviously, I'm sure we all know that Mr. Honey is not going to die as the title would suggest. You know, it's Jughead writing a story about them killing Mr. Honey when he's not actually dead. So anyway, let me explain what happens in the episode. So Mr. Honey, of course, apparently banned everybody from prom except for Archie and Jughead. Ironic how the two students out of the senior class that are in that group that are in the most academic danger, end up, being the only ones that are not banned from prom and the ones that cared the least about prom. It's pretty interesting, honestly. And of course, the students decide to revolt, to ultimately make sure they get unbanned from prom. The bans will be lifted somehow. So they decided to probably prank so they decided to prank him. So I think they stick. I remember from what I recall, they put glue on his chair and they made him stay on the chairs that he couldn't escape. And it was pretty humiliating for Mr. Honey, but it was funny for the ones that were watching, especially for Reggie and Cheryl. Out of all of the kids, I think out of all of the teens, I think Reggie and Cheryl hate Mr. Honey the most. I think, but that's just what I think, anyways. Because Cheryl, of course, the whole cheerleading thing and everything, her party being canceled, earlier in the season, and Reggie, of course, with this car being damaged, But that's just what I think, anyway. So Jughead starts writing a story about Mr. Honey getting killed, since he was accepted to the University of Vermont, I think it was called, the University of Vermont? Or was it the University of Ohio? Not Ohio, I mean Iowa. I think it was the University of Iowa. I think I made a mistake there, yeah. So anyways, Jughead's writing for the university. And he starts writing about how they kidnap Mr. Honey, they find him in the school hallway, they duct tape him, they restrain him, they gag him, they start kicking and beating him when they restrain him to the chair, and then they start punching him, and then of course Mr. Honey identifies all of them. And then Reggie, of course, lets it slip. Mr. Honey it was actually a ruse. Mr. Honey didn't know it was them. He was just simply waiting for one of them to say something really dumb, So then Reggie starts hitting Mr. Honey, and then Mr. Honey makes a crack about Reggie's dad, because you all know Marty Mansell hit his son, so Reggie, of course, tries to attack Mr. Honey. Now, keep in mind, this is only based on Jughead's story. This is not actually real events that are taking place, but it's being shown in the episode because Jughead is writing the story. So then, they have Archie and Jughead have to hold Reggie back, and then all three of them walk out of the room. And then, meanwhile, Betty tries to give Mr. Honey the yearbook that she was completed, that she wrote about. But Mr. Honey wouldn't accept it because, apparently it was due a few days earlier. But then Betty was trying to explain to Mr. Honey, but he wouldn't listen, so Betty had to walk out of there, of course, because there wasn't any point in trying to explain to him. So you can imagine how infuriated Betty is at this point, so the revenge plan is definitely in way. For them to prank Mr. Honey or something to humiliate him. So Jughead continues writing the story about about Cheryl is the next person to be in front of Mr. Honey, and she's reading a book or something, and Mr. Honey is just sitting there, restrained and everything. So Cheryl just leaves him sitting there, even though he tries to bargain with her, make a deal. Of course, that doesn't work because they're still going to get punished. So of course, Cheryl leaves him there as it is. And then meanwhile, the teens decided to get their parents involved. And now this was kind of interesting because we all know Hiram Lodge, of course, is by far the most controversial, the most hated parent on the show, and yet even he was helping out the teens. Even he was there to help them, so that's pretty ironic, honestly, after all Hiram did in Season 3 to Archie especially, but... anyways, the parents came in, Alice, Mary, Hermione, FP, Tom Keller... I didn't see Sierra McCoy there. We haven't seen Sierra in quite a while, honestly. I feel like we haven't seen her since In Memoriam. I think we haven't seen her at all since then, actually. Wow. So yeah, we see the parents gather together, and they try to get Mr. Honey to back down, to make him realize that if he keeps this up, they're going to get the Board of Education involved, because Hiram Lodge, of course, has all the power. He's the mayor, and he'd have ties to Governor Dooley and, of course, the Board of Education. So, of course, you all know that things are not going to look good for him. And Mary is a lawyer, and Alice is a reporter, and, FP and Tom Keller are the fists and muscle and brawn. So, of course, that's going to, make Mr. Honey back down. But then Mr. Honey then shows a tape of somebody walking through the hallways, and for everyone's safety, he decides to cancel prom altogether. So, of course, Betty and Jughead get Charles to investigate all this, and then they find out that Mr. Honey was, of course, lying about that whole thing. He fabricated it. And as a result, Mr. Honey ends up losing his job and is fired. It was pretty interesting to see. You know, but then if we later find out that the reason why Mr. Jughead got into the University of Iowa is because Mr. Honey sent a letter of recommendation. A letter of recommendation. And in the story, apparently, which Jughead was writing, Reggie apparently ends up dying because they accidentally killed Mr. Honey, and because of that, Reggie couldn't control himself, and eventually he ends up dying himself as well, and everything. So they decided to keep their mouth shut about what happened to Mr. Honey. But then in but then since Jughead found out that Mr. Honey was the one who sent that letter, he decides to change the story. He decides to rewrite the story and have it so that Mr. Honey lives, but like ends up recovering in the hospital rather than dying. So of course, Betty told Jughead it was like Betty, of course, figured out that it was because of the letter and everything, and then Jughead, of course, realized that Mr. Honey, of course, he was just reveling in the town's suffering, and he just wanted to see somebody else suffer for a change, like Mr. Honey in this case. And Mr. Honey wasn't actually a bad guy. True, he was strict. Okay, he was strict, and he treated the students harshly, but he still, had good intentions apparently, despite everything. Even though hardly anybody in Riverdale was truly good. He had seemingly good intentions, which was strange because I thought Mr. Honey was the one sending all those tapes to everyone in the town. So if it's not Mr. Honey, it might be Charles. I don't want to say it's Charles because I think Charles is a good guy, despite the fact that he interacted with Chick, but at this point, who else could it be? Charles is the one who knows about Jughead's stories, and he knows that Jughead was writing the story, and that tape showed 6 people, okay, like wearing masks resembling Archie, Betty, Reggie, Veronica, Cheryl, all them in front of Mr. Honey, apparently killing him, making a reenactment of Jughead's stories. And who else knew about Jughead's story? Charles knew about it, which is why Charles would be the suspect in this case. I hate to say it, but it probably is Charles. So those are my thoughts about the 4th episode. The 19th episode of the 4th season of Riverdale. I thought it was a good episode. I thought the episode was interesting. I thought the episode was, I wouldn't call it necessarily a good season finale, because this was not originally the season 4 finale. They were going to make a few more episodes, and then they're going to have them graduate and make that the season 4 finale. But since because of the because of the pandemic breaking out, the worldwide pandemic breaking out, and people, because of all the destruction the world is going through right now, that's why that was like they had to cancel production and make that the season 4 finale. And it's honestly, it's really sad in all honesty, but it had to be done. A person's life is far more valuable than any TV show, and it had to be done for the safety of everyone involved. But those are my thoughts on the 19th episode of the 4th season of Riverdale. Killing Mr. Honey. Those are my thoughts, and I hope you enjoyed this review. I don't know if I'm going to be able to watch season 5 of Riverdale. I might be able to. I can't say for sure. I'm hoping I'll be able to, but, who knows? Maybe I'll get the chance, Maybe I'll get the opportunity to. I really would love to, if I could. Tonville Legend, 826 out.